The citation had been placed under the wiper at exactly 2:47 p.m. A $150 fine. The notice listed an expired parking meter and a stay that exceeded the posted 2-hour limit, 4 hours in total. The vehicle was parked just outside the Rhode Island Hospital Cancer Center, where time often stretches in ways no sign or meter can measure. Inside the courtroom, 14-year-old Jessica Rivera held the ticket in both hands, keeping her eyes down as she waited to speak. The car belonged to her mother, and the violation was issued to her mother as well, but her mother couldn't appear to contest it. She was still upstairs in the hospital, recovering from what was meant to be a standard procedure. The surgery had run twice as long, shifting from routine to urgent as complications emerged. Jessica had spent those hours inside the parked car, unable to wait in the recovery area because minors weren't allowed to remain there alone. She stayed close because she was afraid her mother might wake up looking for her, and she didn't want to risk being somewhere she couldn't be reached. The fear of missing that moment kept her anchored to the parking lot. Parking Officer Todd Marshall sat several rows back, checking the time as the hearing moved forward. To him, the situation looked straightforward. A posted limit was exceeded, and the violation was clear on paper. His record showed consistent enforcement in that area. 47 citations outside the same cancer center over 6 months. Each one issued during moments when families were facing medical uncertainty. Moments that rarely fit neatly into a 2-hour window. Behind Jessica, her Aunt Carmen rested a supportive hand on her niece's shoulder. Carmen carried a collection of hospital papers, procedure notes, recovery updates, and written confirmation of the unexpected complications. Her eyes revealed the strain of the past day, and the tissue in her hand carried the weight of conversations no family wants to have. Judge Frank Caprio, reviewing the file and taking in the sight of a child sitting alone at the defendant's table, was moments away from realizing that this case was bigger than one parking ticket. He would soon learn that the city's performance-based citation system encouraged officers to monitor high-stress locations, including hospitals, and that Jessica's citation was part of a larger pattern affecting families in crisis. But before any of that could be addressed, he focused on the immediate question. Why was a young teenager standing in court in place of her recovering mother? The issue before the court was simple on paper: 4 hours in a 2-hour zone. Yet the real test was whether the rules would be applied mechanically or with context. Would the situation be viewed strictly as a violation, or would the court acknowledge what happens when life and regulations collide? For viewers watching from Providence, from waiting rooms, or from anywhere someone has faced the uncertainty of a loved one's medical emergency, this story may feel familiar. If it does, share your perspective below. And if you want to hear more real cases where judges look beyond the page and toward the person, make sure you're subscribed to Order in the Court. These moments unfold every day. Moments where fairness depends not just on the rule, but on the understanding behind it. It was Wednesday morning, 10:45 a.m., when the hearing began. Another ordinary day on the schedule, but not at all ordinary for the family standing before the bench. Providence Municipal Court opened its morning session with the usual mix of parking disputes and minor violations. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until the clerk called a case connected to Rhode Island Hospital, a case that would quietly set off a much larger discussion about parking enforcement near medical facilities. Rivera Maria. Citation 4782B. Meter expired, hospital zone. The words echoed across the room as a teenage girl rose from the front row. Jessica Rivera, wearing a hoodie that looked like she grabbed it after an overnight stay in a waiting chair, stepped forward. The yellow citation trembled slightly in her hands. Fatigue clung to her, an exhaustion familiar to anyone who has spent night after night navigating hospital corridors. Behind her stood her aunt, Carmen Rivera, holding a folder packed with medical papers and updates from the oncology floor. One hand clutched the records, the other rested on Jessica's shoulder to keep her grounded. In the gallery, Officer Todd Marshall watched with folded arms. He had written countless tickets in that area and assumed this one would be as straightforward as the others. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from the file and paused. Before he even finished reading the name on the citation, he noticed the defendant's age. His tone softened. "Good morning. You may have a seat." Jessica sat slowly, while Carmen remained standing protectively behind her. Frank scanned the ticket details, reading them aloud as he went. The car belonged to Maria Rivera, a 2011 Toyota Camry. It had been parked on Hospital Street, in a metered area next to the cancer center. The time stamp read 2:47 p.m., with a total stay of 4 hours and 12 minutes, well beyond the posted 2-hour limit. The fine, $150. He looked up from the page. This is in your mother's name. Why are you here on her behalf? Jessica's voice was soft, but clear. My mom can't come, Your Honor. She's still in the hospital. She had surgery. Frank nodded gently. Is she doing all right? What kind of surgery did she have? Cancer surgery, Jessica replied. It was supposed to be 2 hours, but something happened. It took 8. They didn't have room for me upstairs, and I wasn't allowed to stay alone in the recovery area. So I waited in the car. I didn't want her to wake up without me there. Her explanation landed heavily in the room. Frank reread the location on the citation, then slowly lifted his gaze toward the gallery. Officer Marshall, you issued this ticket? Todd stood. Yes, Your Honor. The vehicle stayed past the limit. 4 hours in a 2-hour zone is a violation. Circumstances don't change the regulation. Frank asked, did you see anyone inside the car when you placed the citation? I saw a kid sitting in the back seat. She had a phone in her hand. But the rules are the rules. Time expired means a ticket. You saw a child alone in a car outside a hospital for several hours and still issued the citation? Frank asked, his tone still calm but firmer. Todd straightened. My responsibility is to enforce the parking guidelines. If everyone stretched the limit because of a personal situation, the system wouldn't function. Frank set the ticket down and let the silence settle. Then he asked, Officer, how many tickets have you written near the hospital in the last 6 months? Todd shrugged. I don't track the numbers. I work the zones I'm assigned. Bailiff Rodriguez, Frank said, turning toward the bench officer. Retrieve Officer Marshall's citation record from the past 6 months. I want every ticket issued within 2 blocks of Rhode Island Hospital. A wave of murmurs passed through the room. Someone in the back whispered about performance expectations. Todd's jaw tightened as he shifted in his seat. Nearly 20 minutes passed as Jessica sat quietly, Carmen's hand a steady reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. Officer Marshall checked his phone twice. Frank continued handling other cases, though his eyes drifted back to the Rivera citation more than once. Finally, Bailiff Rodriguez returned with a thick stack of printed reports. Frank flipped through them in silence. With each page, his expression grew starker. Officer Marshall, he said at last, in the last 6 months, you have issued 127 parking citations in the hospital zone. 47 of those were written directly outside the cancer center. Most involved vehicles parked 3 to 5 hours past the meter limit. He placed the report down carefully, because the numbers told a story that the citations alone never revealed. Frank lowered the papers. The courtroom felt airless. 8 hours. A 14-year-old alone in a parking lot. A mother bleeding internally on an operating table. And a citation time-stamped right in the middle of a life-or-death surgery. He set the documents down with deliberate care. Officer Marshall, arms rigid at his sides, stared straight ahead. Officer, Frank said quietly. At 2:47 p.m., while surgeons were fighting to keep this woman alive, you placed a ticket on a car belonging to her only child. A child who had nowhere else to go. Did you know the hospital forces minors out of the surgical floor during emergencies? That's not part of my... Frank cut him off. I didn't ask for protocol. I asked if you knew. Marshall's jaw tightened. No, Your Honor. Did you consider, even once, that a nearly 4-hour overage outside a cancer center might indicate an emergency? A complication? A human crisis? I enforce the time limit, Marshall said flatly. That's my assignment. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Frank tapped the file once, sharp, controlled. 47 tickets. 47 families sitting in waiting rooms, praying, crying, bargaining. 47 moments where someone you love is on an operating table or tethered to a chemo infusion. And instead of compassion, they got a fine. Jessica wiped her cheeks with the back of her sleeve. Carmen held her tighter, trembling. Frank reached for the photograph, clipped to the hospital record. Maria Rivera unconscious in recovery, intubated, pale, tubes everywhere. He held it up for the courtroom to see. "This," Frank said, voice steady but dark, "is where Maria Rivera was when Officer Marshall wrote that ticket, fighting for her life while her daughter sat alone, terrified, with no adult, no updates, no idea if her mother would survive." Marshall looked away. Frank leaned forward. "This is not enforcement. This is cruelty hidden behind procedure." The room was pin-drop silent. "Officer Marshall," Frank said, "I am not asking you to justify city policy. I am asking you to justify your humanity. Too terrified to leave, too young to wait inside. And at 2:47 p.m., right in the dead center of that nightmare, a parking officer wrote a $150 ticket." Frank's voice was quiet now, almost gentle, but every syllable landed like a hammer. "Officer Marshall, while this child's mother was on an operating table fighting for her life, while Jessica sat alone in a car praying her mother would survive, you issued a citation. Is that correct?" Todd swallowed hard, face flushing red. "I didn't know the situation." "You didn't ask," Frank replied, eyes piercing. "You saw a child alone in a vehicle for hours outside a cancer facility, and instead of checking if she needed help, you wrote a ticket." Silence hung heavy. "Bailiff, please contact the Providence Parking Authority," Frank said. "I want the director here. I want answers on quotas, metrics, and whether Officer Marshall has been specifically assigned to hospital zones." Within an hour, Michael Foster, 52, director of the Providence Parking Authority, stood at the defense table looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Frank began immediately. "Director Foster, does your department operate under a quota system?" "Not quotas, Your Honor. Performance metrics. Officers must issue a minimum number of citations per shift to justify operational costs." "How many?" 15 citations per 8-hour shift." "And Officer Marshall?" Foster sighed. "He consistently exceeds expectations. He averages 22 citations per shift by targeting hospital zones." "Because they're easy," Frank said coldly. "Because families can't leave dialysis, chemo, surgery, radiation, consultations, or emergencies." Frank tapped the data on his bench. 47 tickets outside the cancer center alone. Average fine, $150. Total revenue, $7,050, generated from families dealing with cancer. He looked straight at Foster. "How much of that revenue factors into Officer Marshall's performance evaluation?" "It's part of his annual review," Foster admitted. "Citation numbers influence advancement." "So," Frank said slowly, "he is financially incentivized to ignore context, disregard human suffering, and target families during medical crises because they cannot physically move their vehicles." Foster had no answer that Frank's decision was swift, firm, and unmistakable. "This citation is dismissed. Jessica, you and your mother owe nothing." He turned to Foster. "I am ordering a full review of all 47 citations issued outside the cancer center within the last 6 months. Every family who paid a fine is to be refunded in full." He continued, his voice carrying authority that made the entire gallery lean forward. "I am further recommending, on the record, that your department eliminate performance metrics tied to citation counts, establish a medical validation program with Rhode Island Hospital, and require officers to contact patient advocates before citing vehicles that appear overstayed near medical facilities." Then he faced Officer Marshall. "You are suspended pending an internal investigation into whether you deliberately targeted vulnerable populations." Frank's tone softened as he turned to Jessica. "I'm sorry you endured this while your mother was fighting for her life. You did nothing wrong. Your mother did nothing wrong. This system failed you, and that failure is on us, not you." Jessica tried to speak, but tears overtook her. "Thank you, Your Honor. We couldn't afford the $150. Mom's medical bills are already over $60,000. I didn't know what to do." Carmen wrapped an arm around her niece. 3 weeks later, Officer Todd Marshall was terminated. The internal investigation was damning. finding he had strategically targeted hospital zones precisely because they produced high citation numbers with almost no effort. Families trapped in waiting rooms, minors stuck in cars, people unable to leave ICU or surgery floors. Easy money. He admitted he knew most vehicles belonged to families in crisis. He admitted he used no discretion. In his final interview, he expressed zero remorse. I enforced the rules as written. If the city wanted exceptions, they should have put them in writing. The other 46 families were contacted one by one. All were refunded. One woman, Patricia Morrison, had paid her $150 ticket the week her husband entered hospice. I didn't have the energy to fight. My husband had days left. The ticket was just one more cruelty in a series of cruelties. Her refund arrived in the mail. A small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. Public outcry grew. Pressure mounted. Within 2 months, sweeping reforms were implemented. Parking meters near hospitals extended from 2 hours to 4. Edical parking validation zones were created. Officers were required to check with patient advocates before writing any ticket outside medical facilities when a car appeared overstayed. Performance metrics were eliminated. Officers were now evaluated on community service, professionalism, and discretion, not how many tickets they could churn out. Rhode Island Hospital adopted a validation system so families facing emergencies, long procedures, or extended treatments could park without fear. No more choosing between being present at a loved one's bedside and running outside to feed a meter. The reforms came too late for Jessica and the 46 other families, but they would protect thousands who came after them. Jessica Rivera is now 15. Her mother, Maria, is alive. The surgery succeeded. She's in remission, fragile, but fighting. When I saw that ticket, I wanted to cry. Jessica says, Mom was in surgery. I didn't know if she'd survive. I was 14, alone in a parking lot, terrified. Then I found a $150 ticket on the windshield. She pauses. We couldn't afford it, and I didn't even know you could fight a ticket. I thought you just paid. Carmen, her aunt, sits beside her. I was furious. My sister was fighting for her life, and they ticketed her car with her daughter inside. It was cruel. So I gathered the hospital records, and we went to court. Maria Rivera, now 43, keeps the dismissed citation tucked inside a folder with her discharge papers. These represent the same day, she says softly. The day I almost died. The day Jessica waited alone. The day someone saw a crisis and wrote a ticket. And the day months later when Judge Caprio said, "No, that's wrong," and made it right. Judge Frank Caprio keeps a copy of that same ticket in his chambers, the yellow slip that started everything. $150, he says. 4 hours. Cancer Center. He taps it lightly. Officer Marshall looked at that car and saw a violation. I looked at the same citation and saw a 14-year-old girl waiting to learn if her mother would live. Those are two very different things. He holds the ticket up. This represents everything wrong with turning human suffering into revenue. Jessica's mother was in surgery. Jessica was alone and terrified, and the city's response was a $150 fine. That isn't law enforcement. That's a failure of compassion. Patient advocacy groups recognized Frank for exposing the hospital parking scheme. In interviews, he never sugarcoated the issue. Parking rules exist to manage limited space, he said. But when someone's mother is in cancer surgery, fairness means understanding that feeding a meter might be impossible. Jessica couldn't leave that car. What if her mother had died while she was at a meter? What if the hospital called and she wasn't there? A child shouldn't have to choose between being available for a dying mother and avoiding a parking ticket. He lifted the stack of dismissed citations. These represent 47 families facing cancer, surgery, treatment, and loss. And we ticketed them. We added financial stress on top of medical trauma. That is not governance. That is failure. Jessica's $150 ticket became a symbol. Patient advocacy groups show it during presentations. Hospital administrators reference it during meetings. Ethics courses for parking officers use it as an example of how rules without compassion turn Yule. Providence's reforms sparked change across the region. Boston eliminated meters within a block of major hospitals. Hartford created free medical parking with validation. New Haven extended meter limits to 6 hours near treatment centers. And it all began because a 14-year-old girl refused to silently accept injustice. Jessica, with her aunt's help, walked into a courtroom and told the truth. She exposed a system that prioritized revenue over humanity. And Judge Frank Caprio listened. That day proved something simple but profound. Parking citations aren't just about rules. Behind every ticket is a person. And sometimes, the most important thing a judge can do is look past the paperwork and see the human being underneath. Rules exist to serve people, not crush them. Compassion is an exception to justice. It is justice. What do you think? Should cities create medical parking zones near hospitals? Should officers who ticket families during emergencies face consequences? Share your thoughts below. And subscribe to Order in the Court for more stories where justice sees people, not just violations. Dramatization for storytelling and education, not legal advice or reporting.